All right, such a turnout. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's so exciting to see so much interest and engagement in such an important moment. And thank you, Secretary Fontes, for joining us tonight. Before we begin, I just want to let the audience know that we will have some time for audience questions. So think about what you may want those questions to be, and we'll call you up here in a little bit. Secretary, your time in elected office as recorder of one of the swingiest, biggest counties in the nation.
You make it sound jazzy. I kind of.
It's pretty
like
jazzy.
Yeah.
And also as chief elections official in one of the fiercest competitive battleground states in the country, has crossed Trump's time in office. You both sort of ascended at the same time. How would you rate the strength of American democracy on the day that you first took office as recorder to today?
The strength of American democracy as I first took office, I think was pretty robust. That would have been January 1st, 2017. And today, I think we have seen some significant erosion in that strength. We see Congress that is reluctant at best at checking the executive and exercising its power as a co-equal branch. I think we have seen a series of states moving towards changing rules mid-game, which I think is one of the biggest strengths of American democracy, is that it's predictable. We have rules, there's due process. And I think that there's what we've seen as an emergent set of rhetoric out there to a degree, and we've heard it more and more in the mainstream, bemoaning democracy itself, talking about certain groups of people shouldn't be voting, and really the notion of limiting the capacity of everyday Americans to be able to cast ballots the way they want to, with ease of voting and access being sort of sidelined in favor of more scrutiny on voters and things of this nature. So I'd like to say something different, but I don't know that our democracy is as strong now as it was on January 1st, 2017. And I'm not happy about that. But I think that gives us great opportunities to, first and foremost, be big enough to admit that and to look carefully at our nation and where we stand and say, just like somebody who might have some other sort of issue, my tires are low, I gotta go get air in my tires, right? It gives us an opportunity to work towards something better than what we have today, even if what we have today isn't as good as what we had previously.
So the foundational elements of this democratic experience or process experiment are weaker than they were 10 years ago, is essentially your assessment. How would you say that politics, American politics and discourse, has changed in that time frame?
Oh, well, I was new to American politics at that time. That was the first elected office that I had run for, so I was really very much an outsider. November 2016 was the first time I'd stood for election, and it was a great adventure. My campaign was like we were building a rocket on the way to the moon, and
don't tell Senator Kelly that.
Yeah, no. But I think that it's a different type of discourse now. But one of the things that I think is a strength that we can see there is a lot of people really bemoan this. They're like, oh, it's so much more harsh now. It's so much more mean now. And I look back at some of the things that some of the founders would write about each other and write about each other's moms. And I'm like, we don't even see that today, right? So are we better off as far as the discourse is concerned? Are we worse off? Or are we just a little bit less reserved and less polite, a little more raw, a little more straightforward? I think it's a matter of taste more than anything else. But I do think that there are some significant challenges that we need to overcome. And what I think is really going on here is that we've seen some of the weaknesses of our system exposed and exploited, right? And I think some of those weaknesses are, we built America on trust. We trusted that everyone who went into office would have everybody else's best interest in mind. And that's I think, where we're kind of on shaky ground right now.
Okay, so I want to go a little bit deeper into that.
Okay.
After the 2020 election and in the days before the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, you were hunkered down inside of the Maricopa County Tabulation Center, if I recall correctly. You were there with lots of your staff, you were there with poll workers, and you were worried that there would be bloodshed on that day. I remember essentially an army of MAGA supporters. I remember Alex Jones being out there. I remember Steve Bannon. I remember the QAnon shaman protesting. Some people were carrying rifles.
There were a lot of rifles.
I remember one of your staffers, a concern about one of your staffers who was circled by protesters, and some of your staff watched in horror as she was almost pulled into the crowd. How has that experience from 2020, I know for a lot of people it feels like a long time ago, but how has that experience really shaped how you approach your position and your job today?
Well, let me go back a little further than that. In January of 2017, just a few weeks after I took office, elections were declared critical infrastructure by the Department of Homeland Security. And so between 2017 and through 2020, we were really looking at security. We were looking at cybersecurity. We were looking at a lot of things that elections administrators had never really looked at before. And so we were kind of ramping up towards this sort of a thing. And the day after Election Day 2020, immediately the next day, the next morning, and I remember vividly, we were in my office at the county recorder's office in the West Court building planning for a physical assault on the warehouse. And I remember vividly thinking back to some of my training in the Marine Corps. How are we going to stop the advance? How are we going to stage the gate? Because it's a fortress now. If you've been down there, there's walls and fences and security and all this stuff. It was wide open back in those days. And we, even to the point where we're like, okay, there's these like decorative rocks that will go along the sidewalk. How do we make it so that an advancing group of people would have to go through those rocks so that they're kind of uneven on their feet? Like, thinking about those things, putting a SWAT team inside the warehouse in case the perimeter was breached. I mean, it was that kind of thing has impacted everything since then. We're thinking about sight lines. We're thinking about physical barriers. We're thinking about all of the stuff that none of us should have to think about as civilians working in something that ought to be, I'll steal a phrase from my old opponent, Stephen Richer, ought to be kind of boring, right? Elections administration is the most fundamental government activity, and yet we've had to come at it with this almost militaristic mindset now about the preparedness for worst case scenarios, and we're still there, yet with less resources and less support than we had in the past. And so it's very, very difficult, but it has impacted almost every decision that we've made. It's impacted me and personally, my family. I mean, it's not an easy place to be, but it's a worthwhile fight. I know that sounds kind of a little cheesy, but it's true. And this is the fight of our time.
How has it affected you personally and your family personally?
Well, I have security now. I have briefed my kids on what to do if the wrong types of things happen at home. my wife and I have had intimate conversations with the Phoenix Police Department because my youngest stepson is nonverbal. He's Down syndrome and autism, and if they show up because of an emergency at the house and there's a non-responsive 9-year-old kid, they've got to treat it certain ways. And we've been doxxed, or we've been swatted at the house. We've had people show up and stuff, and it's nerve-wracking, and it's not what anybody should have to deal with. But my kids, we talk to them and they understand we're doing this for everybody else so that everybody else doesn't have to. And they understand that it's important. And I give them an enormous amount of credit for being as strong as they are. And I give my wife an enormous amount of credit for being as strong as she is, because this isn't something that anybody should have to deal with, particularly at home. And I'm not the only one.
Right.
There have been secretaries and clerks across the country who've had to deal with this stuff, and we shouldn't have to.
In Arizona, do you think that there are adequate resources to ensure that you and the thousands of people who work in elections, who volunteer or work full-time in this moment, do they have the resources that they need to be protected?
We have the resources we need, but they're not being allocated towards our protection.
What does that mean?
That means that the legislature is not prioritizing the safety and security of our election workers and elections officials. That means that over the last 3 years, I've asked for more than $17 million, not just to secure our electronic systems, but to make sure folks in the counties, in those election offices, have what they need. But for what ARPA money we can get out of the governor's office, we haven't gotten what we needed. And you can't tell me that the money isn't there when you're spending $15 million on a rodeo in Prescott. God love the rodeo in Prescott, but what is the priority? And I'm gonna be my meek little self and just come out and say it. We hear all the time from politicians at the state capitol that they want security, and they won't pay for it. They won't fund it, they won't support it, and they continue to shortchange all those folks in those counties across Arizona, including my office as well. And you try to be polite, you try to work across the aisle, you try to be nice, and you meet a brick wall. We don't have what we need because it's not being prioritized, not because it doesn't exist.
So you are echoing a lot of the other sort of familiar sentiments that election officials here in Arizona, other election officials seem to hold, that they don't necessarily feel safe. And this obviously has led to a turnover in institutional knowledge and has a lot of other sort of implications ahead of another pivotal midterm election. The president continues to say that he falsely won the 2020 election. He's clearly very fixated on trying to exert as much federal power over elections as he possibly can, even though states have the constitutional authority over these elections.
Yep.
He's pardoned J6 defenders through the Department of Homeland Security. He has essentially retreated and cut back the federal government's role of helping states protect the election processes from a cybersecurity and a physical infrastructure point. He wants to do away with vote tabulation machines. We heard a New York Times interview where he said that he wishes his administration would have seized boxes from 2020. There are all kinds of pressures to the system. How are you preparing to run elections, to oversee elections this year when the threat to the democratic process isn't coming from outside, it's coming, as people like you have said, from the inside?
Yeah, I think the phrase I used was the bad guys are inside the castle. It's hard. It's hard because, again, in 2020, after 2020, and a lot of the stuff that was going on, we knew that we could depend on folks across the diaspora of elections officials, and that includes in Arizona boards of supervisors are our county election boards and county recorders and election directors and stuff. We have a very different landscape when it comes to a lot of our officials now. And the problem that we have is, again, and I think you hit the nail on the head, we have a chief executive of the federal government who doesn't want to be subject to the whim of the people through the democratic process and denies falsely that he lost many, many years ago and wants to, and is petty and petulant enough to want to go relitigate all of this. And we all know this. This isn't new. The problem that we have is there has been a systemic erosion from some people on the political right. And I will say not all of them, because there's plenty of Republicans out there that cannot stand what's going on here. But those some people on the political right that are moving the president's agenda forward are just abject cowards. And they're afraid of the wrath of this one person who, by any stretch of the imagination, folks that have stood up to him, you know, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, he's an empty suit. We, the American people, have stood up to folks like this before, and it's those folks with the political courage to stand up, in my view, are the ones that get like a lot of credit for helping move us forward. And it's really difficult to say how we are preparing for 2026 when we're basically scraping together what we can based on where we've been left. And it's hard because of the erosion of CISA, for example.
Yeah. So, and we'll get there. But in 24, you were really worried about political violence. You were worried about artificial intelligence. You were worried about deep fakes. You were worried about the threats, voter suppression, and the threats that were coming in to polling places. But this moment seems much different than that moment.
Oh, it's very
and so
different.
How do you help oversee elections given that dynamic?
Well,
or do you not yet know?
Well, I mean, again, there's no playbook for where we're at. No one's ever been here before. We've never had an America where the president doesn't want elections to move forward. We do now. So what do? We lead from the front. We call a spade a spade. We call it out for what it is, and we move forward doing the things that we need to do to protect those processes by utilizing those processes. I could go out there and encourage all kinds of crazy activities. I could go out there and be a bombast and call for all kinds of other extra political activities to fight back and be that activist and do those things. But I would be betraying that civil process that I want to preserve if I did that sort of thing. If I called for violence, for example, I would be betraying the notion that we don't want violence. And I would be leading wrongly. I have to lead in a way that maintains the due process, maintains the rule of law, maintains a strong posture at the same time as we try to make sure that folks are doing the right thing. It is not hopeless, and we are not helpless, but it's an incredibly difficult question to answer because there's so many little bits and pieces to this, and I'm trying not to bore you with details.
It's like little fires everywhere, right?
Well, yeah,
And
but
deep,
all of
deep
those little fires everywhere is a giant, inferno, and we are experiencing a 5-alarm fire moment. We've seen political assassinations in this nation just this past year, in 2025.
So what are the worst case scenarios that you're preparing for?
Well, the worst case scenarios that we're preparing for, to be honest, and I've said this before, I can't discuss them because I don't want to give the bad guys any more ideas because I don't know how smart or dumb they are. But I do know that we're preparing for them, and we're working with all of the partners that we can find who will be able to help us move the agenda forward, to move the elections forward. But we already know some of the things that might be attempted. We know that there is a supervisor in Cochise County right now who refused to certify the 22 election, I think it was, is still pending a criminal trial for that. Criminal charges. We don't have a playbook, Yvonne, and that's the hard thing. So we've got to take it as it comes. We've got to stick with our principles, and as we make decisions day in and day out moving forward, we hope for the best, and we hope for the goodwill of the folks out there in the world to help carry us forward. Now, that doesn't sound great. I'll be the first one to say it, because as I'm saying these words, I'm not instilling a ton of confidence in the audience here.
So what is your plan then? For example, if the president or someone else tries to get a hold of vote tabulation machines, what if they cancel the election? These are really real concerns.
Look, you can't cancel the election, okay?
Tries to.
Well, it tries to, you know, we're working, okay, so we have been working closely with the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office. We've got a whole bunch of scenarios that we're playing through to make sure that we're prepared for the types of processes that might be necessary to preserve our democracy. So that if somebody tries to cancel something, if somebody tries to take some stuff they're not entitled to, we can go to the courts, get the orders, and hopefully have the backup of law enforcement to make sure that we can move forward through this. But here's the problem. The fact that we're running through these scenarios in the first place should tell you something about the health of our democracy. The fact that I've got a plan to try to get a court to order someone not to steal ballots, that's a problem in America. And some people will say, well, that's not America. That is America today. We live in a nation with a diminished democracy, and it is an embarrassment that we are here. We have countrymen and women, our fellow Americans out there, who don't want democracy anymore. That is a horrific realization. But if we don't face it, if we don't talk about it openly, if we don't admit the truth, then we're burying our heads in the sand and we're letting the bad actors run roughshod over everything. I can't tell anybody in here what to do. But if you're not doing anything, I'm jealous of your privilege.
So just on one issue, ahead of 26, the Justice Department is pushing back on you and a lot of other secretaries around the state, trying to get you to give them unredacted voter information. So these are files, Excel spreadsheets, essentially, of information that includes names, it includes social security numbers, driver's licenses, all kinds of sensitive information.
Yep.
You've told the Department of Justice to pound sand, and I'm quoting you there.
And I don't mean that in a nice way. Yeah. Yeah.
The Trump administration would say, look, we're just trying to make sure that voter rolls are clean. We are entitled to this sort of information.
2 lies.
What's the harm?
3
What's
lies.
the harm? What's the worst that could happen if you give them information that a lot of people already presume they have?
Well, look at what happened with the 300 million Social Security records that were put on unsecured servers. How many people in this audience had your data potentially out there in the world in servers that we don't know who had access to it? And what can happen to your identity? And oh, by the way, A, they're not entitled to it. B, we don't know what their processes are. We don't know why they want to use this information. I've been having court, they're my best pen pals right now, by the way, at the Department of Justice. We've been back and forth since the end of July. And I will tell you right now, take notes if you're taking notes, 16-168 subparagraph F tells us that it is a Class 6 felony in Arizona if you give up the day and month of a voter's birth, their social security number in whole or in part, their tribal identification number, their father's name, their mother's maiden name, and a whole bunch of other stuff. There are 8 subsections in that subparagraph that if I turn that over, it's a felony. Now, there's this other little thing called the Privacy Act of 1974 that was created post-Watergate because Congress was worried that the federal government would misuse the data of American citizens, so much so that even publicly available data cannot be collected legally unless it is for a very narrow purpose and only used for that purpose. We don't have a real purpose from the Department of Justice. We don't know why they really want it. They've said, oh, it's because we want to make sure you're not violating the Help America Vote Act. No. It's the Civil Rights Act. Oh, wait a minute. It's not that either. It's the Voting Rights Act. I'm like, I don't know what they want to do with the information, but if they subject your personal identifying information to some kind of abuse, and it was me that gave it up, you wouldn't be happy with me. And I don't want to give it up. I'm not going to give it up. And they're going to have to, like, I've said, they're going to have to treat me pretty poorly, and they're going to have to get it from somebody else, because I'm not going to give up Arizona's voters' information under any circumstances. It's not going to happen.
This is one very important area, an area that I think we'll be talking a lot about in the coming year as this fight escalates over the voter roll information, not just here but elsewhere. There's another really important area. There's an agency within the Department of Homeland Security that was created to help protect infrastructure, including election infrastructure. Last year, someone staged a covert attack on your office's website, and they replaced a bunch of candidate photos from 2016, I believe, with pictures of a late Ayatollah. You and your office did not report this incident to CISA, which is this federal agency.
Right.
Why didn't you share that information, and how could that potentially make elections less safe by not sharing that sort of information?
Well, CISA doesn't exist anymore in the form that it did. Let's be really clear here. I'm not the one who dismantled CISA. I'm not the one who took away the technical agents that states used to depend on. I'm not the one that shut down all of the communication between so many of those folks and our state. I'm not the one that shut down the interstate communication among folks. That was the administration who did that. And when you take an agency that is charged with securing critical infrastructure, which, as I've stated, elections are, and that agency no longer can support you for no good reason, you got to really be suspect. And oh, by the way, what a lot of people don't know about this is that a month or 2 or 3 before that attack happened, I sent a letter to Secretary Noem, and I told her, in good faith, you guys got elected, you're in charge of this, you can shuffle the deck chairs and have these guys report to this person and those people now report over here. That's fine. Don't kill our services, don't kill our access to the folks that are helping us. And I got 0 response, and they still haven't rebuilt what they decimated. Would you trust them? I don't. And I don't have any reason to, because they haven't given me a reason to trust them. And so when we get to the point where our website gets breached, I spoke with the folks that I needed to speak with. Arizona's Department of Homeland Security. And they let the federal folks know that something was going on in Arizona. And we were well within the law to do what we did. We still work with the National Guard. We still work with the Arizona Center for Anti-Terrorism, the ACTIC. We still work with all of those folks who are still helping us. But when it comes down to the Department of Homeland Security, they've completely abandoned their duty to help protect this piece of critical infrastructure by decimating CISA. So I'm not going to play nice with folks who don't have any intention or any motivation to help us help our systems. And the last thing I needed was to give them something that they could politically weaponize.
Okay, so what is your response to some local elected officials who would say Adrian Fontes is weaponizing the position of his office, that he is pursuing political ambition, or he is approaching this from a political vantage point instead of, and being hyperbolic or dramatic, overly dramatic about some of these scenarios.
I
And
would tell them, walk a mile in my shoes. Walk 1 mile in my shoes. Hell, walk a couple of feet in my shoes. Live the experience that I've lived. Look at the support that we had, even under the first Trump administration, by the way. Because CISA was pretty helpful under the first Trump administration when I was the county recorder, right? So when you have this new set of leadership coming in at this point, and they do things to keep you from trusting them, why would you just trust? This is not the reality that we expected back in the days. The underlying foundational trust that we had is gone now, but it's gone because the administration has chosen to remove it from the process, not because we're not going to protect Arizona's voting systems and Arizona's voters' information.
one more quick question before we go to audience questions. The people who want to spread election conspiracies and misinformation and disinformation have had enormous, enormous success. They can transmit this information in seconds.
Yep.
It's believable. There is a huge audience that is primed to believe it. The Atlantic posted a piece just now about a new conspiracy, or a revival of an old conspiracy that is now new again. What you are doing and other election officials around the country are doing to try to combat this misinformation by being radically transparent, inviting people in, taking them on tours, answering every single possible conspiracy, going down the rabbit holes, it's not working. So is it time for you guys to try something else?
I don't know that it's not working. I don't know that it's not working. Here's the thing. When you corner a rat, that's when it bites. Otherwise, you're just chasing it around the kitchen or the garage or wherever you guys have your rats. I don't know. Everybody has them somewhere different. I think we have the rat cornered. And I think people have come to recognize the fallacy of the election denialist lie for the most part. There are still some adherents. There are still some folks who are benefiting greatly personally from the grift. And we're always going to have, the flat earthers and these sorts of things, people who believe these conspiracies and this nonsense. And it's a free country, believe what you want. But I think more and more people, as has been shown by surveys, believe that elections are run well. And we saw one of those surveys come out this fall where confidence in election administration in this country has risen. But I would caution, we always have to be vigilant and we have to continue to fight against this, because I can tell you right now, there's a group of folks on the political left who have this little, I don't know if you've seen this, there's this little conspiracy about the last presidential election in some county in New York, and I don't know, I don't pay attention to it, but people are like, oh, the election was stolen from Kamala Harris. I'm like, no, it wasn't. And we shouldn't, we on the political left should never fall for this kind of balderdash, right? We're supposed to be like the smarter, like ivory tower nerds, right, who have it figured out. And so we're going to keep fighting the fight the way we've been fighting the fight, because I think in the long run, we're right and we're making headway. The bad guys, however, are being a little bit louder because they're getting a little more desperate. And they're moving into spaces where I think they're losing support. And numbers show this to us. We have some polling on our fight against the DOJ that shows that we're doing very, very well. We know that...
How can I get that polling?
I can't give it to you. It's political. It's just like non-political stuff. But what we do know is that it is working. Is it frustrating? Yes. Is it a hard fight? Yes. But there's no sense giving up, and there's no sense changing what we know is working, even if we're only incrementally making the positive difference, because I don't think there's a lot of space for the other side to grow.
Questions from the audience?
And there's a mic right up there.
There's a microphone right here.
Good evening. As the people's representative, Congress is supposed to convey and execute the laws. What should we be asking our congressional delegation to do to support you and other secretaries around the country?
Fund elections. I've testified before Congress a couple of times not just on security of elections officials, but on what it takes to actually run elections. But it's not just at the federal level. It's at the local level as well. I don't know if you know this, but there was a Republic If You Can Afford It, I think is a publication that came out in December of 2024, and it shows that Florida spends $20 per vote cast and Arizona spends $9 per vote cast. And so there's this great disparity across the country, depending on resources and politics and things of this nature. But the people's role is vital, and your voice is vital. Don't stop if you're doing it. And if you're not doing it, start. Talk to your representatives because they represent you. But don't just do it at the federal level. Do it at the state level because we've got a state legislature as well. And it's important that they all hear from all of us. It's important that the citizens rise up and have their voices heard. This is critical. And again, we've heard this for generations and generations, and it's true. It works. You know, the citizens rose up and, you know, kind of like a redux of the Boston Tea Party, we saw a certain, you know, ketamine-induced billionaire get chased out of Washington, D.C. when people started spray painting his Tesla dealerships and, you know, messing with him in that way. He had to leave because the people rose up. Now, it was a little bit violent here and there was some property damage, oh well. But the bottom line is that same revolutionary spirit still exists in the American public. And people like me still believe in you, every single one of you as part of the American public. But you got to reciprocate. You got to give back to the system what you want from the system. You want action from the system? You have to take action. You want your representatives to represent you? Tell them how. Communicate with them, even if it seems frustrating and fruitless. Just keep on pushing, and we'll get to the promised land eventually.
I saw more hands go up. Do we have more questions? Go ahead. There's a microphone right there, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, if you go ahead, we'll repeat it.
My guess is you can probably hear me. My question is, how are you collaborating with other states, and in particular, those that are Republican?
So the question is, how are we collaborating with other states, and in particular, those that are Republican? Well, I'm going to have another chance to do what we do in a couple of weeks. The National Association of Secretaries of State is going to be getting together in Washington, D.C., which we do a couple times a year. We were in Biloxi, Mississippi this summer, and we get together and talk about stuff. We talk about policies. We talk about ways that we implement certain ideas. I remember vividly I was on a panel because this documented proof of citizenship thing is growing across the country. Arizona has been doing it for 20 years, right? And so what my presentation was, this is a cautionary tale. And here's Wyoming. They just got it, you know, and that secretary thinking he's got all the secrets, and the secretary from New Hampshire is thinking he's got all the secrets, although in New Hampshire you can use a family Bible and the entries in the family Bible to help show citizenship. Can you believe that?
Know that.
Yeah, no, well, I heard it. He was sitting right next to me. But we do share best practices. We share cautionary tales, and one of the most interesting things that happens, which we don't discuss outside of it, is a secretaries only meeting where we have very blunt and very frank discussions. And I think most people in this room, if not everybody, would be heartened to hear that there's not that much space between us if you take out the politics. We are all still, for the most part, wanting the same kinds of things. We want solid systems that are accountable, secure, and accessible once you remove the politics. And so we do work together and communicate quite a bit. Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, gentleman in the back.
Given that the cover of the latest issue of The Atlantic has a picture of the attack on the Capitol and the caption, "Donald Trump does not want you to remember this," I'm wondering what you think Congress should do if we win back control of the House in the midterms. Should they try to impeach Trump again, or is that, do you think, too divisive?
Well, I didn't think it was too divisive in the first place. And I think it was the greatest failure of the American legislative branch not to impeach and convict in the first place. And it was abject political cowardice that the person who I mean, we saw it happen, we heard it happen. They talked about it on the floor in the U.S. Senate. And they talked about what an absolutely terrible assault on American democracy happened. And then they turned around and didn't convict. Like, that was so incredibly disappointing. And they did it for political advantage because they're like, it's too divisive. Well, where are we now? Where we are right now is we live in a country where masked, armed men operate with impunity, kidnapping people off of our streets and deporting U.S. citizens to countries that they've never been to. We have immigrants who are showing up as the law requires and obliges them to immigration courts, and they're getting disappeared from there. And you know, it doesn't impact a lot of folks in this room, I'll say, because I'm looking around the room, and there's not a lot of brown people in here. And I'm not going to be shy about that. As a Latino, I have a real problem with the fact that this is going on and there isn't a bigger reaction. This is the result of the cowardice of the United States Senate back when those first sets of impeachment should have gone through. We would not have to deal with this today. We'd have other problems. Certainly, we'd have economic problems and diplomatic problems and all the other stuff. But I do think that if the majority shifts in Congress, that is possible. Whether or not the courage exists on Capitol Hill is a question for those folks on Capitol Hill. They've got to live with the legacy of their inaction. They've got to live with the legacy of what has happened since then. And I would be embarrassed if I was one of those folks who didn't actually make it happen.
I think we're going to go ahead and leave it there. Secretary Fontes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, everybody.